All right. We should be live on Facebook and YouTube right now. I'm not certain whether that's the case, but I'm hoping it's working. Let me go ahead and set up this record. Hello and welcome to the shop. My name's Joaquin Watai, and hopefully you're seeing this on my Facebook or my YouTube live. Don't have a way to monitor it at this moment to check and see if that's what's happening. But we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a piece of hard maple, and we're going to make a French rolling pin out of it, 18-inch French rolling pin. So we're just going to go ahead and get started because we have a little bit of work to make happen. Let me move my air compressor hose here. For those of you watching on TikTok, I should be streaming live on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you want to see the multi-camera view, check out those platforms. You will also be able to hear me better on those platforms because I am using my microphone run through the streaming setup for those platforms. So I'm hoping that's working. I don't have a way to monitor it at the moment. I'm working on that out. But check it out over there. Otherwise, you're going to have to make do with the sound you've got, and I apologize, but I can only send sound to so many places at once using the headset microphone, and that's going to the other platforms at this moment. So the first thing we're going to do here is find centers, obviously, and I don't have my center punch over here, but I don't really need it. I can line up between centers here fairly easily. And this is about 24.5 inches long, which is why I am doing this on my Rockwell Delta lathe, which has a 12-inch swing, but it has 3 feet between centers. It gives me a little more room to work. So we're going to go ahead and get started on that. Just a second here. It's been a little bit of a minute since I've used my multicam setup. So we're going to try to get you, there we go. So the people who are watching on multicam on the Tube of View channel or on Facebook are seeing a overhead view right now. I can't do that here. Snafu, do me a favor. Go over to my Tube of View channel and see if this is streaming live, please. But we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to act like this is working. And that automatically started to record, and I turned it off. That was good. So we'll try to make sure that we're getting this all working right. So the first thing we're going to do is round this up, put a tenon on this end so that I can put it in a chuck. Make sure everything's clear. Very good. We're going to go ahead and put face shield on and get started. First tool we will use is a spindle roughing gouge. This is a 1.5 inch spindle roughing gouge from Packard Tool Works. I really like it. It's a good tool. get a little bit firmer hold on this. It's spinning because I'm using a step center for my drive center, which it's supposed to spin. This is also called a safety center. It's supposed to spin a little if you're getting too aggressive. Rather than allowing a catch to happen, the wood will stop. The center will spin in the wood. This is a very nice piece of hard maple. There we go. Now we're getting a nice cut. Not quite round. Just about there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move the tool rest over. It's always safest to stop the lathe before you move the tool rest. That way you don't bump a moving piece of wood and cause a jam up of some kind. Always turn by hand, make sure everything's clear. Go ahead and get down to this end. We've got it mostly round. We still have a little bit of a flat area, but that's okay. We just want to get it basically into round and get a tenon on that end so that we can get it mounted in a chuck. still have a little bit of a flat area. Not going to be concerned about that for the moment. What we really need to do is worry about getting a tenon on this end so that we can get this mounted in a chuck before we start working on final dimensions. And for that, we're going to go to a skew chisel, and we're going to spend a couple of seconds here and strop this skew chisel. So what I've got here is a strop block with a piece of leather mounted on it. We're going to go ahead and hit it with some stropping compound, and we're just going to pull along the curve of the skew. And I will do that an equal number of times on each side. And that should give me a very, very fine edge, which it is. Shaving hair just fine. So we're going to go ahead and work on this end here. Come in with a peeling cut, the skew chisel. Set a little tenon. And hopefully I didn't get overexcited and make that tenon too small, but we'll check that real quick. I think we're good. Let's take our chuck, pair of vernier calipers. Ooh, we are a little small. May have to rethink that tenon real quick. Hang on just a second. Thankfully, I have plenty of room. Yeah, that tenon's just a hair too small. I have plenty of room, so what I'm going to do is clean that up. Just make it thinner so that it'll kind of sit down into the middle of the chuck and set a second tenon. Wait for the lathe to get up to speed. So Rockwell Delta has a variable frequency drive. That was a much later add-on than when this lathe was built. And it's wonderful to have a modern drive on it. But because of the way that drive is programmed, I believe, it doesn't speed up quite as quick as the drive on my Laguna. Not really anything wrong with that, just something I need to work with. Go ahead and check that tenon. Looks like we're about where we need to be, which is good. That will let us get this reversed and in between centers. Very good. Okay, we'll do that right now. Again, for those of you on this platform, if you want to hear the microphone and see the multiple camera views, go to my YT channel. Link is up there. You can also should be able to find it on my Facebook page. Let me grab a knockout bar. I'm working on this is my second lathe. I'm not always in front of it. I'm usually in front of my Laguna, and my shop is kind of oriented around the Laguna. It is quite the privilege to have two lathes. I now need to collect a second set of tools. One for each lathe. That way I'm not chasing myself back and forth trying to figure out where each tool is for which function. But we'll get there. One little step at a time. Okay. Unfortunately, I can't lock my chuck on this lathe. There's not a flat spot on the spindle for the locking screw. If you do have a flat spot on a spindle to lock your chuck onto your lathe, do it. That is of vital importance for safety. Okay, so we're going to loosen this up a little bit, and we are going to use the tail center to drive this surface right here down onto the shoulder of the chuck. We want to have a positive meeting here between the flat surface I created when I turned the tenon and the shoulder of the chuck. So a little bit of pressure there. Tighten this chuck down. But it's also important to remember when we put pressure on a spindle, we are creating the possibility for that spindle to start to bow. So once you've got that seated, you want to back your spindle off at least, or your tail center off at least a half turn. That tail center should be there to support, but it should not put any kind of pressure inward, which could create a bow in your piece. All right, so our length is 18 inches. We have plenty of space to work with. We'll go ahead and mark that so that we know what we're dealing with. And again, we're not quite round. We'll get there in a second. But I just want to make sure that I keep my distance that I am working with set up so that I can aim for it and manage to get it where it needs to be. So we'll go back to the spindle roughing gouge and just finish rounding it off. And actually, we can take the skew, just make a V cut there so that we know that's the end. We're going to go ahead and slide on down here. See if we can manage this kind of screwy angle overhead. There we go. Oh! Without overbalancing the camera. Sorry about that. Okay, almost round. Still want to work on this a little bit more. And again, take the skew. A little V cut here shows us where the end of our rolling pin is at. Now, if you are joining me here on YouTube or on Facebook Live, I do not have a monitor set up. I have no way to watch and see your commentary. I apologize for that. I'm working things out so that I can manage that. So bear with me as I get those steps in order. But we will get to that. Now, here, what I'm going to do is offset from the ends about 4 inches. We're going to offset 4 inches from each end. That is going to be where I put my taper for my French rolling pin. So I still have not been necessarily worried about getting this completely round, because I'm going to set this center section. That is going to be the maximum width of the rolling pin, and then it's going to taper from these ends. So what I have to do now is line my tool rest up parallel to the bedways of the lathe, so that I have a straight edge to reference in order to turn this section precisely straight, the same diameter from end to end. As long as I have this lined up, I'll get this a little bit better, lined up dead to rights with the bedway of the lathe, as long as I keep the distance between the tool rest and the wood the same, I will have a nice straight cut. Parallel sides and a consistent diameter. I'm taking a nice, very fine cut. We are actually riding the bevel of the spindle roughing gouge, which can give you a finishing cut. The name of this tool is deceiving. It doesn't just rough. You can get a very nice, fine finishing cut off of a spindle roughing gouge. Feels like we need to take a little tiny bit more off. And it looks like I did that just right, about right. I still have a little bit of a flat spot over here. So we'll go back the other way, see if we can clean up that flat spot. Taking a whisper fine shaving here. That feels like we got it. We are round, nice and smooth. Beautiful. And that is our maximum diameter, and we can begin to do our taper. So we have that markable, visible ends here that change that, so we can start to do our taper. We're going to taper on the tail end first. We'll go ahead and bring our tool rest down here so that we can work. And clear a little space, because good grief, there's a lot of shavings. one thing I'm working out is getting a longer compressor hose so that I'm not tangled up in lines from the cameras. Okay, here's where we start our taper. And what I'm going to do is come in with a parting tool. Apologize for the little bit of an angle there for those of you watching on the multicam. But I'm going to bring in a parting tool here, and I'm going to take down this end. I'm using it just like a skew with a peeling cut. I don't really have a formula here. I don't have a mathematical goal. I'm going to turn that down to a diameter that looks right. And we will call that diameter 1 1/4 inches. So we'll make sure that we try and match that diameter on the other side. And now we will simply taper our spindle. We want to curve that taper a tiny bit. Okay. Now we need to get in there close, so we will switch to the skew chisel. Start by rubbing the bevel. We're just working very lightly here. Try it left-handed. I'm having a little... There we go. Just make sure that we have a nice clean curve to work with when we start sanding. We got a little bit of bounce, a little bit of tool bounce. Just this is a very, very hard maple, so we're going to smooth this out a little bit. Have a little bit more control right here with the spindle roughing gouge. Can kind of work past that little bit of weirdness there. There we go. Okay, now we need to work on this end. We're going to come in with a 3/8 inch spindle gouge. First, we're going to clear away some space, place for the tool to go. Take a very fine slicing cut here. And just make sure that we have a nice, smooth, consistent curve. Feels pretty good. Come in here again with a V cut. And we're getting that whistle because this is sharpened very, very fine. And I am now so far off the tool rest that I'm getting vibration. I'm going to go ahead and slow the lathe down a little bit. What I want to do is undercut this end. All right, I need to get the tool rest in closer. It's too much vibration. I'm about almost 2 inches off of the rest. This is a French rolling pin. But I need to get that tool rest in there so that I have leverage. Okay, and again, I slowed the lathe down. I'm going to part this. I have a way to hold it after it's been parted, which I will set up in a few minutes. But I need to get this end down where it's supposed to be. And actually, you know, before I get too excited, I should probably shave it. I should probably sand it, at least this end, so that once I've got this all finished shaping, I can sand this end, have this all end up all sanded up, and can worry about the other end. So we're going to do that real quickly, and that should help take care of any mildly miss. Take it. So we have a couple little tool bumps here and things, which is kind of hard to avoid. This lathe is on rising blocks, and it kind of rocks a little bit. It's 6 inches shorter than I need it to stand, so I had to do a little modification. But there's nothing we're dealing with that we can't sand, and sand fairly quickly. So we'll do that real quick. Get this end sanded, probably about to. We'll even draw ourselves a line about right there, so that we can worry about that end. Slow. We will sand in both directions. If you consider the structure of a grain of wood, essentially it looks a lot like this spindle here. It's a tube. Those tubules carry water and nutrients from the soil up into the canopy of the tree, help supply the process of photosynthesis, and then transport water and nutrients back down. So essentially, a piece of wood consisting of grains, if you cut it up and look at it under a microscope, looks like a bundle of straws. Now, if you think about sanding or cutting a bundle of straws, and you consider what happens as that rounded shape is coming towards you, and you're cutting it with a blade, you're going to cut the front edge pretty easily. But the back edge of that round is going to end up getting pinched to a bit of a taper, kind of like that. If you then reverse the lathe and sand in the opposite direction, you'll round that taper out and have a smoother feeling finished product. At least that's the theory that I've come up behind sanding in both directions. And it seems to give me a better result consistently. So then I sand with the grain. Now we're going to step up. That was 120 grit. What we're going to do is blow that off, and we're going to raise the grain with rubbing alcohol. I use rubbing alcohol instead of water because it does the exact same thing. The wood grain absorbs the moisture, the liquid, swells up, and then we sand it back. However, especially on a day like today in North Carolina, it is obscenely humid, and water would take half an hour or longer to evaporate, whereas alcohol, even in this humidity, will take about 2 minutes. So it saves a lot of time to using alcohol to raise the grain rather than water, and it has the exact same effect. That's a nice piece of maple. All right, we'll go ahead and get our next piece of sandpaper. Now, I raised the grain this time. I'm going to hit it with alcohol again, but I already raised the grain, and we're about to sand back that grain that swelled up. So why am I hitting it again? Well, because the next one is just to clean the 180 grit sanding remains off before I hit it with 240 grit, so I don't put 180 grit scratches in the 240 grit surface I'm about to create. Oh, got a piece of 180 grit sandpaper here, and you can see that alcohol is almost completely gone. And if you have a little trouble getting it to evaporate, you can hit it with the air compressor or just give it a little tiny bit of friction with your hand, and it's gone, and you can continue to sand. So this is 180 grit, and at this point, sanding is going to go very, very quickly. Still going in both directions. Again, we want to make sure that we round over both sides of that straw so that we get the smoothest finish possible. Use your hands when you're sanding. Get your fingers in there. Your fingers can feel a difference of microns. So if you get your hand in there and feel the surface you're sanding, you can find very, very minute inconsistencies, and you can get the sandpaper where they are and remove them. Feel the surface while you're sanding. It makes a difference. Okay, then we're going to go with the grain. And what this does is, as we sand, we make little rings in the surface perpendicular to the bedway of the lathe, right? So we're not removing those scratches. We have 180 grit scratches in little rings, right? We're not removing those. What we're doing is redirecting them into the grain of the wood, and that helps fool the human eye into seeing them less. And it ends up being a finer finish. At least it looks finer if we redirect those rings every time, every grit. I prefer every grit. Some people say, you don't have to do it until the final grit. I disagree. I think you should do it every grit, because what you're doing now at sanding, I've already removed any roughness or anything. All I'm doing now is removing the remains of the prior grit with each incidental grit. So that includes those rings. If I don't do it, those dips, although it may be microscopic, are going to continue. So I don't want that. I want to get rid of all of that. Clean it up. I've already raised the grain. The grain that was going to absorb liquid and swell is gone. I am just cleaning off that 180 grit so that when I sand at 240, I am not putting 180 grit scratches in the 240 grit surface that I'm about to create. Again, you can hit this with the compressor or just give a little light friction with your hand, and that will remove the rest of the alcohol. It'll evaporate it right away. But you can even sand with it a little bit. Wet sanding is a great technique and can help give you a little bit of a smoother surface. It's not going to hurt with a little alcohol there to sand it as it's drying. Basically wet sanding. But it does gunk up your paper a little bit. Just be aware of that. So remember, we're just coming to the middle. Get this end done, parted, and then stabilized with a a little life center I'll show you. I made for a completely different purpose, but works really well for these. So we sanded forward. We're at 240 grit. We're going to sand in reverse. We're just removing the prior grit. The marks from the prior grit. It does not take long. Okay. And again, between each grit, I like to sand with the grain. Redirect those rings, help hide them from the human eye a little better. Blow it off, clean it with alcohol again. Just removing that prior grit so that we don't put 240 grit scratches into the 320 surface we're about to create. Now, the reason I'm sanding this is because I have a little shop-made cup center that this is going to go into, and I'm not going to be able to access the last 1/4 inch of this. So I might as well get this end sanded up before I part this off and get that into that cup. It'll just make it easier. I won't have to worry so much about the very end. I won't have to worry about the end at all. It'll already be ready to go. Okay, and I have a piece of 400 sandpaper over here. 400 is the last grit I'm going to sand to. And then after we get the other end sanded, we're going to hit this with Brad's Workbench sanding paste. And that is going to take it to a very, very fine surface. And then this will be finished with Brad's Workbench Tongue Honey, which is a combination of pure tongue oil, beeswax, and carnauba wax. Pure tongue oil is a polymerizing oil that, once cured in about 2 or 3 weeks, will be water resistant and is food safe. Beeswax and tongue oil, of course, or beeswax and carnauba wax also being food safe. It's a very good finish. It's water resistant. I never call a wood finish waterproof, but it is water resistant. And my personal rolling pin I've been using for almost a year, and it sheds water just like the day that it was fully cured and I started using it. It washes right off clean, still shiny. It's beautiful. So we're at 400 grit, and we're really have a nice surface here. And again, the sanding paste is only going to take it that much finer, but that's going to wait until we can do the whole thing. So at this point, we're going to be able to finish cutting this end off and part this end of the piece. Okay, we'll switch back to the overhead view here. Hopefully allow you to see, if you're on the YouTube or the Facebook, allow you to see what I'm doing as I part this piece off. I'm going to get my tool rest in there again. Okay, that should give me room to work. Now what I'm going to do is make sure that I'm going to have clearance and I'm a little bit high before I have the lathe turning. Make sure I'm going to be able to get in and do what I need. And I'm not real happy with that. So we're going to try it this way. I need a little bit more rest out here. So test that all before the lathe is moving. Make sure everything's where you want it to be. That's pretty good. Okay. We're going to keep the speed down a little bit. We're probably up around 7 or 800 RPM. But I don't know. I just know that it's slower than I was turning. So I was working on the longer spindle. Okay, and we're going to slightly undercut this. We're almost there. Naturally getting some vibration the thinner we get. But we are at a thin enough point, we should be able to just snap that off. And we'll worry about cleaning that up with a little carving knife after the other end is finished. There we go. And that will give us clean, when we carve this, that's going to give us clean grain because we snapped it off above where the actual surface that we want is. So we'll have clean grain there. We won't have to worry about any tear out or anything. It'll be really nice. Now what we're going to do is we still need to keep this between centers, but we just took away our end. So what I've got is this snazzy tailstock here that has interchangeable tips. And then I made myself this little sphere jig that is a cup, and that gives me the opportunity to put this back between centers without bruising the wood. I now have tail center support and can work on the other end of the piece. So I'm going to swing this camera over. Try and get you guys a little better angle. We'll go ahead and work on this end of the piece. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to bring our taper, and we remember vaguely what our measurement was for the taper was 1 1/4 inches. So we'll go ahead and start with our parting tool down here and set that up at 1 1/4 inches. So come in with the parting tool. And a peeling cut just like you would with a skew. Essentially the parting tool is a miniature skew at this point. We're almost there, a little bit over. Boom. There is 1¼ inches. We'll just come back in with that spindle roughing gouge. Start working that taper. I'm just glancing over at the taper on the other side, trying to make sure that I match it. I can also feel that taper with my fingers. A bit of a shoulder here. Just going to round that over just a little, smooth it out a little bit more. Just like that. Then we'll come back with our 3/8" spindle gouge and start our V-cut on this end. A little too much open, so it's skating back. We've got a very, very sharp, severe angle on that. All I need to do is just close the gouge up a little and it won't skate like that. All right, let's start bringing this little corner around. Now we don't want to get too far with this end either, but I want to bring this around. Then we want to undercut, so I need to give myself a place for my tool to go. But I still need to maintain enough support that I have drive to sand. So I have to be conscious of how much I take away at this point in time. If I take too much away, I'll get ahead of myself and I won't have it on the lathe to be able to sand it. So that's as far as we're going to go at this moment. Time to sand. Go ahead and get the tool rest out of the way and clear out a little bit of us shavings. Now just a little example. That's a shaving you get with a spindle roughing gouge. You can get. That's a very fine little paper fine shaving. It's tiny, but you can do that with a spindle roughing gouge. The name is very deceptive. It does much more than rough. Okay, slow the lathe down. Remember, we're going to start back at the center there. And we'll run back a little bit into the already finished part so that we can kind of blend the two halves together. It was pretty good. Go ahead and sand in reverse. Run a little fast. That's better. Okay. So again, we're going to come back and go with the grain. I need to double check that I am at my target length, 18 inches. Just a skosh over. Beautiful. All right, we're going to go ahead and raise the grain and clean that off. Good morning, Joe. All right, so hopefully this stream is working on the other platforms. I don't have a way to confirm it right this minute. I'm going to be getting a little external monitor that I can hook up so that I can have another screen and see. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. I am not very many subscribers away from being able to monetize my YouTube channel, which would be very helpful in supporting my ability to continue to do live videos and edit videos. Is it? Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it. I don't have the ability of checking it right now because I don't have a secondary monitor. Joe, it's 69 degrees and 100% humidity. It's foggy and miserable. I am sweating. It is gross out here in North Carolina right now. How's it 70 degrees? I'm looking over at my thermometer right now. It's 69 degrees. How is it 69 degrees in December? What is going on? Go home, North Carolina. You're drunk. All right. So that's 180 grit. Hey, I appreciate that confirmation, Chris. Thank you very much. I am going to look at that. They have those little portable monitors that I can hook up, and that'll give me another window that I can manage comments and things like that over there on the other platform. But I really appreciate the confirmation. Okay, 180 grit. Again, we're going to go with the grain here. And what we're doing is we're not making those little rings of sanding disappear. There's still scratches at 180 grit. All we're doing is disguising them in the grain of the wood. Man, this is a pretty piece of maple. We are disguising them in the grain of the wood, which helps hide it from the human eye a little bit better. The scratch is still there. We just don't see it as well. All right. Hitting it again with the rubbing alcohol. At this point, we are cleaning it. We're just making sure that the 180's gone before we start up at 240, so we're not putting 180 grit scratches in the surface. This is going to be pretty. This is a beautiful piece of hard maple. Beautiful piece of hard maple. Absolutely love this piece of wood. Maple is delightful to turn, regardless. But when it's a really clean, nice, straight grain piece of wood, you get that radiant, I don't even know what this figure is called, but it is dead straight from end to end. It's just, ooh, it puts shivers up my spine when maple's this pretty, when any wood's this pretty. This is gorgeous. Yeah, this is some nice stuff. Oh yeah, very hard. This piece puts the hard in hard maple. I'm not going to tell you what it did to my bandsaw. Let's put it this way. I had the fire extinguisher close. This stuff's hard. All right. So, continuing to sand in each direction, both directions. I just find this is personal. If you can't reverse your lathe, then it's not a deal breaker. It's fine. But I just have found in my experience that I get a much finer surface if I sand in both directions. It just makes it nicer. Okay, that's 240 grit. Ooh, that feels good. That's a nice surface. We're going to sand the whole thing at 320 and the whole thing at 400, and then we're going to hit it with Brad's Workbench sanding paste. Oof. So we're getting there. I'll go ahead and switch over so you can kind of see the length here. We're going to go ahead and clean the whole thing off. So by sanding back again with 320, I will make sure that I'm blending the entire length together so that we have a nice singular finish from end to end. Clean that up. Just making sure that we're getting rid of that 240 grit dust before we sand at 320, so we're not putting 240 grit scratches into the 320 grit surface. Whoop. I don't know if I can get in there and get that. I was reading a comment. I have a stack of cameras and tripods and things behind the lathe here. I got a tool wrench that'll reach it. There we go. There we go. So end to end, 320. Oh, what a nice surface. This feels really good, Chris. This is a nice piece of wood. This is a nice piece of wood. This feels fantastic. We'll go again, both directions. Now I have to wait. There is a aftermarket variable frequency drive on this old Rockwell Delta. It didn't come with a digital variable frequency drive, but there's a digital VFD on it now. And unfortunately, as the lathe is slowing, it still remains under power. The VFD controls it all the way down to stop. It doesn't spin freely like my Laguna does. So I have to let it stop at its own speed. I can't just grab the spindle and stop it. So it takes a little bit of extra time. That's it. That's all I need to do with 320. We will kiss it with 400 before we go to the sanding paste. But really, at this point, all we're doing is making sure we remove the sanding marks from the prior grit. We're not reshaping the wood in any way. We're just smoothing out the prior grit. So we're going to blow it off and clean it one last time. Before we take 400 to it. Where'd I put my little 400 grit? That's not it. I dropped my 400 grit disc. Alrighty. Let me grab another 400 grit disc. Apologies. Oh, there it is. Too late now. Always turn your lathe off if you're going to walk away from it, just for safety's sake. Just going to make sure we're nice and smooth, even transition from end to end, which we are. Still sanding in both directions. Boy, that feels nice. Very nice. And we'll run from end to end. Ooh, what a pretty piece of maple. Dead straight. The mill that milled this, because I had to cut this down from a 8-inch wide board, I think. Yeah, I had to cut 2 inches off one side. The mill that milled this cut it dead straight with the length of the tree. There's no variation. That is really cool. That's neat to see. Beautiful piece of wood. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to hit this with Brad's Workbench sanding paste. I do need to tell you that I am sponsored by Brad's Workbench. But regardless of if I had a sponsorship or not, I would tell you this is hands down the best sanding paste, and his finishes are the best that I have found on the market to date. I've tried other brands, and there's no comparison. Now, one brand I have not tried is Yorkshire Grit. I can't tell you anything about it. But this is absolutely fantastic stuff. This is food safe, and this is a friable abrasive, meaning the more you work it, the finer it gets. So I don't bother cleaning off the 400 grit that I just sanded to when I add this, because this is just going to pick up that 400 grit and it is going to break it down as I work it. So all I'm doing is making the sanding paste a little bit more effective. So I got the wet part of my paper towel here. Got the wet part of my paper towel here. The way I use this is rub it in. That's what Brad recommends, is rub it in with the lathe stopped. And then I start at about 300 RPM. Wet part of the paper towel, and I just work it in. Make sure that I have nice, smooth, even coverage from end to end. Then I'm going to flip over to a drier part of the paper towel, and I'm going to kick it up about 100 RPM. And again, I would tell you that this was the best regardless of being sponsored or not. In fact, that's how I got a sponsorship, as I started using this stuff and couldn't stop telling people, hey, you need to get this stuff. So you go to a clean, dry part of your paper towel, kick it up 100 RPM or so, and you just keep doing this until your paper towel comes away clean. At which point, you're no longer removing material, you're just buffing it. Sanding paste has done its job. In general, Brad's Workbench achieves that at about 1,000 RPM. So I'm going to get a fresh piece of paper towel. And my shop is really not set up for me to shoot multicam live on this lathe. I'm throwing paper towels all over the place, missing the garbage can, everything. I'm right-handed, and everything's on my left when I use this lathe. But I really love using this lathe. It is a lot of fun to turn on a piece of history. This was given to me by Jeanette Bean. Thank you, Jeanette. I very much appreciate it. But it's fun to turn on a piece of history like this lathe, but also to have the length that I do. I would barely be able to squeeze this piece of wood onto my Laguna with the lathe extension. Okay. Paper towel is coming away clean. Brad's Workbench Sanding Paste has achieved its goal, which is a wonderful glass-like surface. Look at that. Absolutely beautiful semi or satin gloss surface right there with the Brad's Workbench. There may be better sanding pastes. There may be better sanding pastes around, but I haven't found them. I really love this stuff. And I don't get paid to say that. I've been saying that, which is why he now sponsors me. All right. Now we're going to part this off. So we're going to come in with that 3/8 inch spindle gouge. And we're going to keep this. We're right at 1,000 RPM. We're going to stay there. Maybe slow down a little bit once we get closer to parting. So one thing I need to do is make sure that I have enough tailstock back here that I can angle in so that I can undercut. We're going to go ahead and knock those corners off. Because of that right there. I just pulled my tool rest in. I thought I had it locked down, and I did not. And that pulled the tool rest in and started knocking against it. So we're going to just knock these down. That way I don't bump a knuckle. And we're going to work this out so that we have plenty of space for the gouge to travel. So what I need to do is swing my tool all the way back here and pick up that cut so that I can undercut that slightly, just like that. We're just going to take this down. Same as we did on the other end. We're going to take it down fine enough that we can just snap it off, and then I'll carve out the last remaining bits of grains with a knife. There we go. I'll go ahead and thin this out just a tiny bit more. Stop the lathe. Now the reason I'm doing this is safety. I could turn it all the way through and cut it and it pop off, but that's 18 inches spinning at about 1,000 RPM. If that starts to get going as I'm parting it, I'm not going to be able to handle it at 1,800 RPM with my hand here holding it like this. It's not safe. So we're just going to snap it so that I don't have to worry about swinging 18 inches of hard maple around and whacking something with it, sending it into one of the cameras or something. I'll go ahead and get the tool rest a little bit out of the way. Back off our little cup center. And we can even do this one better. We'll go ahead and use a pull saw just in case. It always pays to be a little careful. going to use this little pull saw. And give me just a second, because I'd like you to be able to see how pretty it's going to look with the finish on it, which we will add momentarily. So I'll get this little hook knife. All you safety-minded people, these are cut resistance gloves. Now I'm going to go with the grain. We're just going to kind of whittle that away. This is hard maple. It's very hard. There we go. Cross grain is cutting cleanly. Just like that, and then we're going to clean that up again with a little sanding in just a moment. You know, I have a tool that might be a little more efficient than the hook knife here, and that is my hand-forged Kiradashi from my friend Samuel Talkington at ST Knife Design. This might be a little bit more effective. All right. Then we'll come back cross grain with the hook knife. Very lightly. There we go. Just like that. Okay, now I'm going to show you a safer way to sand those ends than using your drill, because if you're holding your hand drill, that can walk all over the place and can really be kind of a pain in the neck, right? Well, I have a solution that allows me to do it using the lathe itself, but gives me complete control of the piece. So let's pop this chuck off of here. Get that out of the way. We're going to grab the old Jacob's chuck and a 2-inch sanding mandrel. Now remember I said safe. We're going to put a holdback bar on the back side of this into the back end of that Jacob's chuck so that that chuck won't walk out. That's the safety part. It doesn't have to be super tight. You don't have to crank it down. You just want to have a little bit of finger tight pressure on there with a wing nut and a washer, just so that it prevents that Jacob's chuck from just kind of setting itself free, as it were. Just about got it. I use this holdback bar on both of my lathes, and the head stock is definitely shorter between centers on this one than it is on the Laguna. What's really funny is I have a holdback bar on both lathes right now. I find that quite humorous. Let me grab my chuck and a couple of pads here. We're going to run that at 240 and then 320 and then 400, I think. And just sand off those ends. Actually, we might be able to get away with just hitting it with 320 and 400, which is what I believe I have on here. I do. All right, tighten this down. I'm sorry, I'm working between two different lathes. All right, slow the lathe down. Now, I have this tucked under my arm. I have complete control, both hands, and I can just hold this up and spin it. And look at that. I have complete 100% control. This isn't going to go anywhere, as opposed to holding my drill and trying to sand that end where it could go all over the place. So this is a much safer way to achieve this, sanding this end. Just like that. Works really well. Switch it back over. Again, sorry for the kind of goofy angle. I'm working on a better solution for the overhead camera. Do the other end. Same thing. Tucked right up against my body. I've got it stabilized 100%. It's not going anywhere. Just like that. We'll go ahead and switch out to 400 grit. And then we will bring some tongue honey over here and make it shine. Just like that. Boom. Look at that. Nice, clean ends, nice and smooth. We'll wash this down real quick with alcohol. Make sure we have all that grain clean so that we're not rubbing dust in with our finish. Look at that. What a beautiful, don't bruise it. What a beautiful piece of maple. Really, really nice piece of maple. Be right back. We'll bring the finish over here and hold still. Thank you. A little shelf liner and some tongue honey. Once again, if you're joining me on YouTube, thank you very much. If you are on Facebook watching me live, please consider checking out my YouTube channel. I would really appreciate it if you might like and subscribe to the channel. It would help me immensely. This is tongue honey, again, from Brad's Workbench. You can find it Brad's Workbench on Etsy. You can also find him on YouTube Instagram, TikTok. This is applied. I like to put it on heavy. That's my personal preference. It's up to you. But you wipe it on, and this is again pure tongue oil, beeswax, and carnauba wax. It is in a higher ratio of oil to waxes than his tongue wax, but it is exactly the same finish. You wipe it on, and then you leave it for 10 to 15 minutes. I have a tendency to leave it overnight, just to allow that tongue oil to absorb and penetrate as thoroughly as possible. And then you come back with a clean paper towel and just wipe away any excess. And that is that simple. And it looks beautiful. That is a glorious finish. One of my favorites. Again, like I said, I have been trying different finishes and finishing processes, sanding pastes and the like for years. And Brad's is the finest that I have found. There's one drawback, if you want to call it a drawback, and that it is that it does take up to 3 weeks for tongue oil to polymerize, for pure tongue oil to polymerize. That's absolutely true. But I don't find that to be much of a drawback because of the final product. The finish that it delivers is water resistant. It is very, very, very long lasting. I've got a platter that I made for eating barbecue off of and steaks off of that I have used consistently for more than 2.5 years and still beads water up and water runs off of it just like it did the first time I used it. This is a very, very long-lasting and excellent finish. And if you can be patient enough to let it polymerize, you're going to be very happy with the finish you get out of it. Again, I am sponsored by Brad's Workbench, but even if I wasn't, I'd tell you that's the finish. That's my go-to. That's it for today. I really appreciate you joining me on whatever platform you're on. Thank you for being here or here. I'm streaming simultaneously on 3 different platforms. If you don't know, if you're on that platform and you don't know, if you click in my bio over there, that'll take you. There's a little YouTube and Instagram symbol, and you can find me in both those places via that link in the bio. Please subscribe to that YouTube channel. If you're watching live and you don't subscribe, I would appreciate it if you were a subscriber. It would help me out a lot. And we're going to be doing this a lot more often, so stick around. Thank you very much for joining me.